Good afternoon, YouTube. I just want to do a short video talking about the oil reserves in the U.S. Right now, there are 2 trillion barrels worth of unconventional oil in the U.S. locked up in shale and other formations. A lot of people talk about the U.S. being oil independent and how we should tap that resource, which is a good idea, but from the standpoint that if investing billions of dollars in technology to extract oil out of one of the more tightly bound up forms of oil is a massive investment. And one has to question this investment, is it worth it if one looks at the long-term range of where oil consumption is going? Will it in the end be oil resources that are used up, basically stranded resources? Because I see this $2 trillion barrels of oil as basically stranded resources, given what oil is mostly used for in the U.S. It's mostly used for transportation, a large percentage of it. There are some uses for lubricants, petrochemical, other uses like fertilizers, chemicals, along those lines. But overall, most oil is used for transportation. And what's happening with transportation? We're seeing, for the natural course of what's happening with technology, the electrification is happening. Even if people say, oh, it's a politically driven, but even without the politics involved, if you look at the natural progression of what's happening with battery technology, it's improving every year. You're getting new technologies coming out, new understandings of material science that is slowly making it cost effective for battery technology to niche, work into the market, becomes economic, where eventually it will replace petroleum powered vehicle transportation. Just a matter of time, given the costs slowly come down on electric vehicles, their range continues to increase and the charging capacity time-wise decreases also. Even though most people with electric vehicle, those who own an electric vehicle, and I'm one of them, I don't use it all the time because it's new old technology and it didn't have the range, so it's just sitting in the garage. Still worth investing in from the standpoint that it will be viable technology and is viable technology. It's just the cost right now are so high. Eventually, when the cost of an electric vehicle with a charging time equivalent to a gas-powered vehicle and the range at least as good, if not better, than a gas-powered vehicle, once that price drops below the same price as a gasoline-powered vehicle, people are going to switch to them because it's going to be cheaper. It's going to be, the fuel will be 1/4 the cost. That doesn't include, if that's just using standard grid power. That's not including the possibility that one can install solar panels on one's home, charge the vehicle, store the energy during the day in like an iron oxide, air battery, or sodium ion battery. So it doesn't even use lithium or cobalt or nickel technology. It's not, so it's just dirt cheap materials. So it'll be cheap technology to use. As an example, they're projecting iron air batteries, which is just use iron ore mined from the U.S., processed into iron, and that will be $20 a kilowatt. Right now, batteries like Tesla's $1,000 a kilowatt. Can you imagine $20 a kilowatt? You could basically spend $2,000, have enough storage for 100 kilowatts that would power your car completely for a day if you decide you need to charge it. That's just charging from home. Maybe people won't spend $2,000. Maybe they'll spend $1,000. Maybe they'll spend $500, depending on their need. But that's where the technology is going. And with gasoline-powered vehicles, diesel-powered vehicles, the costs are not going to decrease. The cost for the owner is going to continue to increase, especially when it starts getting into a spiral where more and more owners of gasoline-powered vehicles are looking for a new vehicle and they switch over to electric. What happens to the price of fuel then? It may go down a little bit because less demand, but overall, there'll be less investment in that technology. There'll be more, it will be an ever-increasing cost. And getting back to my main point about the 2 trillion barrels of oil, what happens when 90% of that demand dries up? What happens to that? The market shrinks. Because that's where most oil is used, transportation. Once it shrinks, it's not going to be worth the investment. You're going to have sunk costs that have been spent, and It's just not viable. People like to talk about energy independence. The U.S. getting energy independent. Okay, but what about the individual? What about the individual and their energy independence? When you buy a gas-powered vehicle, you're not energy independent. You can't achieve energy independence unless you have a refinery and oil field and a refinery in your backyard and you own them. Or you make biodiesel, but that is such a small niche. And it's not really cost effective. Well, it is cost effective for some people, but not most people. And once people do that, the vegetable oil becomes valuable at that point, and then costs go up. So you're really not gaining in independence, energy independence as an individual. As an individual with electric technology, you can put solar panels, put in a battery system that'll cut you off from a need for an outside energy source, as long as the sun is shining, or if you don't have sun, a wind turbine, or you might have a stream micro turbine. There's numerous energy sources you can extract energy from. You'll have true energy independence, individual energy independence. You can't get that with gas or diesel, straight up. So all this obsession people have with, oh, let's drill, let's mine this, let's get all the oil. But that's great, but from the standpoint of the individual, you're just saying, I still want to be enslaved to some company where I have to pay out of pocket. I have to work to spend money every year, $1,000 to $5,000 a year, just to fork it over so I can go back and forth. Whereas I could buy technology for the same amount of money within a year or 2 years. That would be capital intensive cost-wise, but once I have bought it, then it's free afterwards for the next 15, 20, 30 years, depending on what happens to technology. And it's because solar panels are actually good for 25 years. There's panels out there running for 50 years. And they're still producing electricity. They degrade, but they're still producing electricity. So this is not worth, it's worth it to look at this long term. And that's where it's happening. But even then, what happens when all that oil is used up? What happens to society? We're going to crash, fall down? No. We're going to switch to other alternative sources besides petroleum and natural gas. This is as simple as that.